Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, right. And it'll do it in the middle of a space, or it could be in the middle of a phone call, and it may go a few weeks without doing it, and then all of a sudden it's just do it like 4 times in a day.
So War
And it
Hamster is going to try to come in, and I see they're deleting people again.
might have to retry again.
Um,
Yesterday, it was great when we started it up the second time.
yeah, there's no reason why we need to be having to do it a second time, obviously. But War Hamster supposedly was in the room and had his hand up, and I never saw his hand.
Same here.
So he has a couple of things he wanted to add on the Doolittle commission. So he just came in and said, "I don't see the space on X." That's hilarious. He's over there on. So let me text it to him.
Here he is.
So
I got him.
that's so crazy. All right, War Hamster. I set the stage. I told people that you were here yesterday, had your hand up, and Bridget nor SR71 nor myself were able to see you. So we're going to let you start the show with your connections on the Doolittle.
Well, thank you. One of your wonderful co-hosts put me up as speaker both times when I came into the room. I just didn't. I guess I just wasn't loud enough. I'll try not to make that mistake too much more. I was the guy standing up there like Horseshack and Welcome Back, Kotter, when you were mentioning, you were asking, did anybody know who else was on the Doolittle Commission? With when you talked about William Pollock. I had done my dive into the Doolittle Commission probably 3-4 years ago. So I was diving into my notes when I realized that was your topic yesterday. And I was actually there for the entire spaces. There was a lot of good, but in my notes, I found some fun stuff from the Doolittle Commission I wanted to share. So I've got about 6 or 7 sentences I pulled out of it, and I'll just pause after each one because you're going to love it, I think.
Okay.
First one, to talk about the Doolittle, the recommendation is that, quote, we establish a covert, psychological, political, paramilitary organization that will be more ruthless than our opponents.
Right.
This is an official government document. Next one is, nobody should be permitted to stand in the way of the prompt, efficient accomplishment of our mission. Sound about right?
Yes.
Next one is, it is now clear that we are facing an implacable enemy whose avowed objective is world domination by whatever means or cost.
But he never identifies the enemy, although we know he means communism.
Yeah, when it comes to Doolittle, yes, it was the boogeyman.
Yeah.
And then he says that there can be no rules in such a game.
No rules. No rules at all.
Yeah, so why even bother having a National Security Act? Because we're recommending an agency that is rogue by definition.
I like that. Rogue by definition. No rules.
It then goes on to say, if the U.S. is to survive long-standing American concepts of fair play, let me say that again. If the U.S. is to survive, long-standing American concepts of fair play must be reconsidered. So basically, we're going to play as dirty as we possibly can.
And, you know, again, if you ever... And this is how you have to couch this from a military perspective. If you were literally fighting, let's just say we were actually attacked without knowledge during World War II. And they did try to take out most of our fleet. And we do know that they're coming for the homeland. And we do know that the threat is imminent. And I mean, legitimately, there's ships sailing now. We're tracking them real time. We've got camera feeds from satellites. We can see the assassins on the ship. The U.S. military job is to counter that offensive. And basically, you would then be engaged in all-out warfare. And in all-out warfare, supposedly, there is rules of engagement and Geneva Convention, like you don't assassinate people who you've already restrained with handcuffs or whatever, just because you don't want to carry them back to a main base and put them in a prison. So there are minimum standards in all-out warfare. Like trench warfare of World War II still had, from our perspective, from the United States, because supposedly we are not the enemy. We don't want to be like our enemy. The whole mantra of America is that we are better than that, and that we are going to basically abide by the standards of humanity, even when you're conducting war. So the idea that you have an entity that is not the military, that has been given the ability to literally be a death squad. So I like the terms that they use to call everybody else names. So we have assassin, death squads, guerrillas. There's all of these names out there to describe the people that they want to attack. And yet, every single one of those names applies to them. Someone would have to tell me, what is the difference between the Colombia narco death squads, the White Hand in El Salvador that were the death squads, and the CIA, based on what you just read, Warhamster?
Yeah, well, they're telling us this brand new agency, we're basically going to say no rules of engagement at all. Anything goes by any means necessary. And it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to see where something like that might possibly go off the rails. But in this case, it's by intent. It was intended to be that way.
And that is what I think the piece that's missing in all of this. People think that the Central Intelligence Agency was set up as an intelligence agency. It was never set up as an intelligence agency. From the very beginning, this is a committee to decide what it's going to look like and what its mission area, what's going to be in its job jar. They are telling you from the very beginning, it was set up to be a paramilitary death squad deployable around the world to do whatever they want, whenever they want, with no rules.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, they'll deny it. But, and there was the debate.
How can you deny it? That's in writing.
It is. But, they had the debate for 2 years whether there should be covert operations or not. In the meantime, the Doolittle Commission's coming out with this report, which is deciding the issue, saying, well, we can't really be ruthless if we can't do the covert operations. And that was the transition right there, from a pure intelligence gathering to an overt. And when you say covert, we got to remind everyone once again, this is basically things you're doing that you don't want the public to know about, because they can't, because it'd never be sanctioned. People of the United States would never, ever let their government act like this if they knew.
And
we do want to have that. We do want to take the high road every once in a while.
The very few times that it got revealed during an operation what they were actually doing, like the Sandinistas and the Contras, the Congress acted to forbid the aiding and abetting of the Contras. The same thing in Angola. And that's the reason why the CIA went outside of the law in this case, because Congress passed a law, the Boland Amendment, that said you cannot do that. They went outside the law. They didn't give a shit what Congress said. The executive branch didn't care what Congress said. They went through Israel to continue providing arms and aid to the Contras which were basically the death squad paramilitary.
You want me to read a few more of these sentences?
Sure.
There's some good stuff in here. Goes on to say, we must develop an effective organization that will learn to subvert, sabotage, and destroy our enemies by any means necessary. That's exactly what we just said. In writing, though. It says, it may become necessary that our American people be made acquainted with and come to understand and support this fundamentally repugnant philosophy.
How would you make them acquainted to this philosophy?
That's the drip. That's the drip mechanism. You basically drip on the public over and over and over again until they get the gradual acceptance.
Or you terrorize them into accepting it.
Oh yeah, you always have to have that threat, right?
Yeah.
All right, last one. It says, hitherto acceptable norms of human conduct must not apply.
That's just devastating.
Yes.
So treat the enemy like an animal. They are not human.
And if that's your mentality of your mission, there really are no holds barred. There are no limits to what you will do to accomplish what you consider winning.
Right. That's the whole point. And you can look around the world, because the CIA trained all of the very people that have no limits. So they took those words and they trained up assassins and terrorists to do exactly that. When they knew damn good and well at the time, there was not the corresponding enemy that they claimed there was. That's, to me, the most devastating piece of this whole thing is, if you travel back in time, there is document after document after document that basically illustrates the dire straits that any entity that was claiming itself to be a communist entity, which primarily was the Soviet Union, and Mao had not even fully established himself in China. They were still clashing with Chiang Kai-shek at the time. So while it did look like that was going to happen, it had not at that time happened definitively. And so basically you just have the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had, 27 million less people in it, and had been devastated by World War II. So they were not a threat. And these people are meeting in the United States, basically creating a paramilitary death squad that's going to be unleashed on the entire world.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've got that kind of a mission statement, which means you have no rules, you're going to accomplish your mission. It's not going to, what's going to stop you from doing, I don't know, crazy things like, maybe assassinating a president, stealing an election. Yeah, there is no holds barred. And it is by, it was the entire creation of this agency was based on, a lack of morals, ethics, or any kind of human rules whatsoever. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. I thought your audience might enjoy hearing that.
Right. To include boiling Lumumba in acid.
Oh, sure. That's like a part of training camp, I think, isn't it? These days.
Blowing up people in cars, kind of like the stuff you're seeing right now, mowing people down in the streets of a city with a vehicle, beheading people. All of the stuff that you see happening around the world was all sanctioned under NSC 5212-2. And it all came out of the Doolittle Commission with William Pauly. And to me, the really crazy part of this is, before we started talking, and I'm not suggesting that people like Brady didn't know, but I'm talking general population in America has never heard of William Pauly. There's probably in this story no one that contributed more foundationally to the creation of Operation Gladio in a real productive way than William Polly.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. I'll go ahead and mute now and let you get into your show, but thanks for giving me the stage for a few
Sure.
minutes.
No problem. Thank you for letting me know. And again, if that happens during the question and answer segment, if you guys have your hand up, because of them screwing with our space, I call on the people that I see their hand up. If you go through around and I do not call on you, it is obviously not because I don't like you. I love Brady. It's because I don't see you. And because of them messing with our system, you are perfectly able to unmute yourself and say, hey, I have my hand up in case you don't see me. And then I will put you in the lineup. But yeah, okay.
Yeah. In fact, they're having some major sound issues down in the listeners, and a lot of them have migrated over to Rumble. I put the link up in the top, which is a trick because they also took over the pill. The pill is gone on this space.
Oh,
so
that's weird.
Yeah. So they're, I mean, call it glitching, call it whatever you want. But there's some major.
I'm all static. That's all I hear is static on this side.
Yeah, that's crazy.
The pill, Bridget, and the way I got into it was clicking on the message in the Megatron.
Right, I had to go roundabout to get there. I had to actually come completely out of the space and go find, but that's another, workaround.
So I guess if you guys, as we go through this, if there's anything that you want to post, just post it up there. It is definitely getting tiresome. I'll just say that. They're not going to beat me, but it is tiresome.
Yesterday when we shut down and we came back in, the space was really good. I mean, as far as from what I understood, the sound was perfect. But unfortunately, first time around was crap. I'm throwing everybody out. So hopefully they get this stable or fix these glitches or
all right.
whatever.
So if you guys are having sound issues, please go over to the Rumble channel called the Colonel's Corner at the link that Bridget put up in the nest. All right. We're going to dig in. So we are talking about the book President's Secret Wars, and we're in chapter 7. This is part 2 of chapter 7 because it is a long chapter. And of course, as Brady just articulated, has lots of really good information specifically about the foundation that was set up in the United States in order for them to, and they just knocked Bridget out, to set up Operation Gladio and the CIA's ability to participate in Operation Gladio legally was done through NSC 5412-1 and 2. That basically set the tone. The Doolittle Commission also, as Brady just articulated, was some of the most ruthless, mind-boggling language. Created a document that we went over yesterday. If you weren't here yesterday, I highly suggest you go. It was at the very end of the show. I went through all of the tenets of the creation of the ability to attack anybody they wanted anywhere in the world simply by calling them a communist. And they later amended 5412 to include terrorist, which is why they worked so desperately hard to creating the white nationalist domestic terror label, because it does allow them to turn the forces of their aggressive Operation Gladio style paramilitary capability on anyone designated a terrorist. And as we saw during the Obama administration, it really doesn't matter what your citizenship is. They'll take your ass out. So back to the story. While President Eisenhower pondered, and oh, that's the other thing. anybody who talks to me about how great of a President Eisenhower is, that just point them to NSC 5412. While President Eisenhower pondered the problems of managing the covert operations and these secret wars out in the field, the Operation Success down in Guatemala was unfolding, and another set of operations was being carried out in the Far East. One was supervised by a guy that we've come to know and hate, Wild Bill Donovan, who ran the OSS. He is now sitting in the ambassadorship to Thailand in, the early 1950s. This was repatriation of the Chinese nationalist in northern Burma in accordance with the express wishes of the Burmese government. So, for those of you who may be new, Chinese nationalist is Chiang Kai-shek and his KMT army, who had basically coalesced among a whole bunch of warlords and was fighting Mao in China for control of China. And the US refused to, once Mao defeated Chiang Kai-shek and kicked him out of mainland China, the US failed to recognize Mao and China as even existing and recognize Chiang Kai-shek as the exiled leader of mainland China. And he spent some time in Burma, and basically Wild Bill Donovan, being the ambassador in Thailand, was intimately involved in what was going on with Chiang Kai-shek. So General Li Mi himself returned to Taiwan in October 1952 because he had been hanging out in Burma as well, but his soldiers were still in Burma. A four-power military conference, including Burma, Thailand, National China, meaning Chiang Kai-shek, and the US, held in Bangkok in 1953, agreed to repatriate the remaining Chinese forces out of Burma and back into Formosa/Taiwan. This was labeled Operation Repat, like repatriation, a civil air transport airlift of Chinese nationalists who crossed from northern Burma to Thailand were flown to the island Taiwan. An initial group of 50 nationalist Chinese, or KMT, troops crossed the border on November 8th, 1953. And keep in mind, this is at the very end of the Korean War as well. It ended in 1953. Bearing no weapons, but carrying 7-foot-tall portrait of Chiang Kai-shek. Flights began the next day. The civil air transport used 8 C-46s for the airlift, and they had been modified so that they could extend their range. In the first phase that lasted into December, 1,925 nationalist troops and 335 dependents were returned to Taiwan. Another almost 3,000 troops and 500 dependents were airlifted out between February and March of 1954. Another several thousand, for a total of 5,583 soldiers, left Burma along with 1,000 of their dependents. And it says each of these people, the dependents and the military, for each of them, the civil air transport, meaning the CIA front company airline, was paid $128 per head out of U.S. taxpayer dollars to relocate a KMT army that was protecting the drug routes coming out of China into Burma, and Burma had a whole bunch of opium themselves. They're relocating a foreign military army onto the island of Taiwan that is massively involved in the drug trade, and your tax dollars back then was being paid to the CIA, Civil Air Patrol, Silver Air Transport, their airline, to carry out this operation. Just another way of money laundering our taxes into their pockets. Operation Repat was something of a scam. Some of the evacuees were not even Chinese. And the flow of these people caused a huge Burmese security problem. In later years, many of them basically ended up coming back to Burma, which increased their security problem. In addition, 5,600 troops were brought out, only 1,000 rifles and only 69 machine guns and 22 mortars. Basically a lot of the antique munitions that weren't even very, as a matter of fact, it said one of them was as old as 1907, was taken out. So they're leaving all of the arms and most of the KMT army in Burma. And because they're running the drug trade out of Burma at this point. There are significant changes that occurred in the Taiwan Straits. The 7th Fleet had been ordered during the Korean War to bar the straits to forces on both the nationalist Chinese side and mainland China. Eisenhower changed the order to only block mainland China and freed Chiang Kai-shek to sell the high seas and do whatever he wanted, wherever he wanted. In early 1953, the U.S. gave the nationalists their first jet aircraft, an F-84 fighter, and sanctioned an expansion of the Nationalist Marine Corps to 3 brigades, tripling their amphibious force. So the U.S. and William Pauly, because he's the one producing these aircraft, so you can see why he was on the Doolittle and he wants these guys to be able to do anything because he's making money selling them the shit to do it. All right, so they're building up under the protection of the U.S., the Taiwanese KMT army, drug traffickers, military capability to reside on Taiwan and shielding them from anything that happens on the mainland. In connection with this fighter jet deal, the nationalists agreed not to use their American weapons, particularly the aircraft, on any mission without asking the U.S. military first. But Chiang Kai-shek didn't always abide by that because 3 months later, in July of 1953, when aircraft were committed for tactical air support to a nationalist force raiding Tunsan on the mainland, they never notified anybody that that was going to happen. The nationalist chief of staff said, "Oh gosh, I'm sorry. It was an emergency." The KMT raiders were being driven into the sea and needed time for an orderly evacuation. The nationalists promised that, "Oh, we won't do that again." But a month later, they do it again. And this time, Chiang Kai-shek's Navy used its American supply destroyer to escort, to seize a Soviet tanker on the high seas outside of, between the waters of the Philippines and Taiwan. Yeah, they're pirates. Another nationalist operation was propaganda, including both radio and leaflets, the later delivered over the mainland principally by aircraft, but also by balloons, bottles, bamboo canisters, basically anything that they could drop out of an aircraft. They dropped 300 million leaflets during 1 year. The CIA early involvement in the global operations of civil air transport also included a second airlift in French Indonesia, which is basically Vietnam. This civil air transport action resulted in the military aid program, which had loaned France C-119 flying boxcar transports instead of the C-47s the French had requested. The first civil air transport flight into Indonesia was to supply a lift to a camp the French had set up in Laos in May of 1953. Within a year, a detachment of 24 civil air transport pilots would be caught up in the French debacle of Bin Fin Phu. 21 civil air transport pilots had familiarized themselves with the C-119 at an air base in Japan. A whole class went to Indochina. These personnel actually outnumbered the French crews by a margin of 2-1 at a very minimum. And they basically went through orientation in the aircraft at Clark Air Base in the Philippines. Squaw 2 was a civil air transport project named for the Bin Fin Phu airlift. Squaw 1 had been the Laotian lift in the spring of 1953. The civil air transport crew brought everything they needed, down to their own refrigerators and beer. In all, the CIA proprietary flew 684 sorties to Dien Bien Phu. All for nothing, because the Vietnamese kicked the French's ass anyway. The pilot who flew the most was a man by the name of A.L. Judkins, Judkins. He had 64 flights. Next was a guy by the name of Steve Cusack, Kusak. He had 59. The original chief pilot's name was Paul Holden, Holden. He was on his 5th mission to Dien Bien Phu when he was wounded by anti-aircraft fire. Pilots recall that the flak over the entrenched camp as being heavy, and said it was worse than anything that for those who had flown in World War II, they said it was much worse than that. Cusack himself was flying a mission alongside James McGovern on May 6, 1954, when the latter was shot down in his C-119. Nicknamed Earthquake Magoon, McGovern died just hours before the final collapse of the French at Dien Bien Phu, 1 year to the day after civil air transport had flown its first mission for the French in Indochina. Because basically what they're trying to do is secure the drug trade there. At one point in Dien Bien Phu's crisis, the French asked the U.S. for a loan of some B-29 bombers. The U.S., while they discussed it, encouraged the French to add their own air component to the French Legion, which could then be given B-29s. And they would loan them the American air crews if they were to do that. The Eisenhower administration was nonetheless so impressed with the civil air transport performance that it considered forming its own proprietary airline to operate and help the French. At the request of the NSC Operations Coordination Board, a plan was actually prepared by General Graves Erskine, Erskine, who was assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Special Operations. The concept provided an entity called the International Volunteer Air Group, which looks exactly like the Flying Tigers. That could be sponsored by France or some Asian government. The unit would fly several squadrons of F-86 fighter jets, and they would be given B-29s as well. It was expected that this International Volunteer Air Group could be set up within 8 months and would cost $130 million. Though first discussed at the NSC subcommittee, the International Volunteer Air Group could possibly have been much wider covert applications, and the potential was clearly perceived by the Pentagon's special warfare planners. Quote, such a unit will always be useful and ready to strike in the event of renewed aggression in any part of the Far East. Without it, no airstrike force exists which can be employed on short notice in circumstances where it's undesirable to apply the official U.S. air power. Unquote. So they're basically setting up, again, a private combat air force. The Pentagon planners believe that the creation of the International Volunteer Air Group was consistent with and within the framework of the U.S. national policy, because having covert air operations is not a big deal at all. Goes right along with our quote unquote culture. So they decided that they needed an opinion from the Attorney General to confirm the legality and the enlistment by U.S. civilian and military volunteers. The original plan called for the creation of a unit before the end of 1954's rainy season in Indochina, but the crisis receded and no action was forthcoming. The U.S. did consider a private firm called Aviation International Limited to recruit aircraft mechanics to assist the French in Indochina. But military personnel were used over the short term until their war ended. The OCB recommendation to form an international volunteer air group was nonetheless taken up that summer. The recommendation was approved by NSC at its 211th meeting on August 18, 1954. Because the Indochina War had already ended, the group plan was shelved as a contingency option, but the planning exercise was significant in establishing the NSC approved role for this kind of illegitimate air force that the CIA had just used in Guatemala and would soon be using in the Far East as well. Aside from the air effort, Indochina was also the locale for a widening paramilitary effort by the U.S., which began secret discussions in 1953. Again, right after they finished getting their ass kicked in Korea. Strapped for money and facing an escalation cost in the war in Indochina, the French asked for military aid for a quote-unquote special warfare. And of course, the Eisenhower administration forked over our money yet again. The main French special warfare activity was running certain auxiliary forces in southern Vietnam, plus partisan units behind enemy lines in the north, like Operation Gladio. In the south, there was two synergistic religious movements, one called Cao Dai and the other one Ho Hei, and also a band of river pilots whose private armies were financed by French intelligence. There is evidence that a senior CIA officer briefed in Saigon in December 1953 regarding the French special warfare actions was offered a role to control these for additional money. The briefing was repeated for another CIA guy in the March 1954, but we're told that the offer was rejected. There are some evidence that they did participate, though. So, rumors in Saigon of American contacts with private armies, especially after 1953, two women connected to the U.S. Embassy were found dead in a Jeep on a rubber plantation close to Dao Kai headquarters. In another incident, also hushed up for diplomatic reasons, a consul at the embassy was arrested on a bridge when he was stopped for an identity check and found to have plastic explosives in his car trunk, which is why no one believes that the answer was no. American special warfare experts were also active in northern Vietnam. In the north, the French had about 10,000 partisans and 19 separate groups operating behind the lines in the northern area. This was an increase over previous levels of just the year before. Beginning in 1953, 2 U.S. Army officers were permanently stationed with the French Special Warfare Command in the north to service all requests for equipment. Major Roger Trinquier, Trinquier, the French commander, requested he had been in Korea to observe how the Americans organized their quote unquote partisan forces. And by partisan forces, they're talking about Operation Gladio. In April 15th, 1954, the American ambassador to Vietnam was reporting that we already are making a contribution to increase French practice of unconventional warfare. Eisenhower himself was not satisfied that it was going quickly enough. June of 1954, he wrote a letter to General Alfred Gunther, Gruenther, who had been serving in France with NATO. I complained that the French had rebuffed most American offers to help them help themselves, but could nonetheless be very effective. This is a quote. I refer to our efforts to get a good guerrilla organization going in the region, unquote. So Ike wants a guerrilla unit in Vietnam, and he's willing to do just about anything to get it there. But the French lost at Dien Bien Phu, negotiated a settlement at Geneva, and then withdrew from Indochina. The partisan groups in the north ended up being taken over by the Americans, who managed to smuggle in a few shipments of weapons and explosives under the cover of French evacuation. So they're running airlift in supposedly to take French out, but they're actually bringing weapons in for the stay-behind units. There were no base capabilities for long-term support, and basically Ho Chi Minh knew exactly what they were doing because he had his own OSS forces helping him do exactly the same thing to the Japanese, and he knew that they were going to try to do it to him because they wanted to install Chiang Kai-shek once they lost Korea into Vietnam in order to have access to China. Better access, I should say. So he knew exactly what they were going to do, and he scouted them all out and eliminated them. The Americans then had to regroup in South Vietnam under quote unquote regroupment zones that had been established in 1954's Geneva Agreement. A unit called Saigon Military Mission was set up in July 1954 to cover for intelligence operations. And of course, it was headed by a guy we've talked about a lot, Edward Lansdell, who at the time supposedly was an Air Force colonel, but never did any real Air Force work. All he really did was CIA bullshit and OSS before that. And he, of course, is the guy that was in the Philippines setting up all of the paramilitary terror squads and the psychological operations. Remember where he would kill one of the Philippine people because of their superstition. He poked holes in their neck to make it look like vampires, hung them upside down, bled them out. And then when their teammates found him, they thought he had been attacked by a vampire. That's the kind of psychological operation Lansdell was known for. He's one of the original PR guys. He was a public relations guy in California before he joined the OSS. So he was full of lots of very interesting operations. France settlement at Geneva provided for elections throughout all of Vietnam. So they were guaranteed to have a unified election after, they had to have it by 1956. And let me just back up, because when we did our Vietnam deep dive, which is on our pinned post under that box link, what we found out was the Vietnam was divided into two sectors after World War II, just like Korea was. So Korea, the Soviet Union got the northern sector and we got the southern sector. In Vietnam, China got the northern sector, but not real China, like mainland China. Chiang Kai-shek, as in Taiwan, China, got the northern sector to basically, under the guise of get the Japanese out so they can have a unified election, and move on about being a country. But we had different designs, and so did the French. So the Brits had basically the southern sector, and they collectively, along with the US and France, decided that the French was coming back in and going to take over the entire country, which it tried to do. Ben Vin Phu was the last stand. They got their butt kicked from Ho Chi Minh, who, again, was a nationalist. He had OSS troops working for him during World War II. He was on the Allies' side. He thought that the US was on his side. He went to the Geneva. He was there. He had a constitution. He wanted his country to be free and have free elections. He wasn't a communist. He didn't become a communist until he decided not to play along with the US taking over his country or the French. And when the French made it clear they were coming back in and recolonizing Vietnam and not going to allow it to be a free country, Ho Chi Minh declared war on the French. It really had nothing to do with the U.S., except for the U.S. wanted the opium thoroughfare of the Mekong Delta in order to be able to traffic drugs. And so there's a lot of allegations about the U.S. kind of prolongingly helping Ho Chi Minh to kind of ensure the French didn't win, so that the U.S. could come in and take over where once they left, but they couldn't really like say that out loud. And then we discovered the whole big boat lift down into from the north into the south, and the airlift of almost 1 million people under a psychological operation torture campaign, much like they did in the Philippines, in the north, in order to under the guise of the Catholic Church, to relocate those people down into the South. Those people, once relocated, becomes the informers on their neighbors in the South, because they don't know them from Adam. And the U.S., in order for them to get money and get paid to be on the dole, like a welfare program, they had to out their neighbors if they were in collusion with Ho Chi Minh, which, of course, if you get money, everybody's going to be in collusion with Ho Chi Minh. And then the U.S. used that as a way to purge out anyone that was actually a loyalist to the Vietnam culture and to a unified Vietnam. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. All right. So that basically wraps up the Vietnam piece of this. And also during the mid-1950s, we have something else going on in Eastern Europe. And we've covered much of the Eastern Europe, both on Alpha Warrior Show when we talked about the Ukrainians and the Ustasi and all of those. So you've got a bunch of Nazis running around. And of course, we helped try to establish stay-behind units in those areas, none of which worked because the Soviet was much better off at spotting them. And so anyway, the CIA and the British decided to go in cahoots to create espionage stay-behind units in the Ukrainian area and other Eastern European areas, using the Army 10th Special Forces, whose entry had been facilitated by the 1950 Lodge Bill, an amendment to the 1951 Mutual Security Act, which set aside specific funds for Army units in Eastern Europe. It might have even been what most people came to refer to it as an American Foreign Legion. And aside from the specialists that integrated into special forces, the Army did nothing with this mandate with which it had been saddled. The Russian propagandists had a field day with it, though. And Frank Wisner told Tracy Barnes in the winter of 1951 that the U.S. was taking a propaganda beating from the Soviets. When Eisenhower became president, he tried to get the Army to cooperate on a formation of an Eastern European unit. Instead, his Army general friends told him all of the reasons why that wasn't going to happen. Ike said, "Fellows, tell me this. Just how high does a fellow have to go in this outfit before he can call the shots?" This is while he's president, by the way. But army leaders continued to balk at the organization of an Eastern European unit modified special forces program in order basically to do overt stay behind capability. A guy by the name of Harry Heckscher, Hecksher. He was the CIA's station chief that basically covered the Eastern Germany, Romania, Hungary kind of area. And he's the one that was, he asked for permission to arm rioters against the Soviet forces. That was denied. Then there was an operation called, it was a study, not an operation, called Solarium, Solarium, that was basically supposed to, it offered, what's the best way to describe this? Basically, they're trying to come up with a way to do this that they could get the military on board by not calling it like Operation Gladio secret stay behind units, but also to quote unquote confuse and unbalance the enemy at the same time. So there was a thing in the Solarium study that was referred to as Alternative C. Then there became a Task Force C program that basically detailed preparations for tactical nuclear/atomic warfare that would expedite a cadre of European immigrant fighters in what was referred to as a volunteer freedom corps and the employment of Chiang Kai-shek KMT Army, first against an island, Hainan, Hainan, and then the mainland in the Asian theater. Planners estimated that it was going to cost $60 billion and then decline to $45 billion each fiscal year. And George Kennan, who was chief of the Task Force Alpha panel of this supposed project, argued for the alternative of containment as offering a much lower cost. Eisenhower took Kennan's point. When the presenters had finished, the president jumped up and said he wished to summarize. Rollback, Ike said, would strain American alliances and represent a departure from our traditional concepts of war and peace. President Eisenhower chose to restrict military spending and avoid the greater atomic war. Few had noticed that the case of the Solarium study, the president did not select a pure strategy, i.e. containment. Kennan's option A was actually mixed with elements of Task Force C as well, including covert operations. Solarium results explicitly raised the possibility for actions that saw later in Guatemala, Iran, and Albania. Again, just another document that, as Warhamster was saying, that documents the fact that this was a well-planned out process. This isn't something that just happened by the seat of their pants or happened in just NATO. There's document after document after document that proves President Eisenhower was setting up Operation Gladio for the U.S. to participate in it, just like NATO. It was not a European NATO only. It was NATO overall. So that kind of gets us to the end of the chapter. It does talk a little bit about the setting up of Radio Free Europe in 1953 as a part of this. Operation Veto, which was early 1954 in Hungary, and basically how in Hungary they had the rising up to throw the Soviets off, and we basically left them out in the cold. We basically ignored the fact that there was people that wanted freedom there and allowed the Soviets to take back over. And that was devastating to Hungary. And so they basically show that if you were to go back and look at where all of this stuff happened, it definitely was financial. If you go to Vietnam, where you have the drugs and the rubber plantations that the French had created, very much a financial situation. If you go to Guatemala, very much a financial situation. We didn't have any financial interest in Hungary, so we didn't really give a crap if there's freedom fighters there and wanted our help. And that's where, when you start going back over the history of this program, it is very clear to see who this program benefited. And just like we quoted Eisenhower as saying that he wasn't allowed to fire Allen Dulles, it is very clear that this program was set up to facilitate the international syndicate and basically had nothing to do with the security of the United States. So that's it in a nutshell. Any comments? I see someone over here on Rumble asking if I can sync the Rumble in space. No. I think there are third-party electronics that allows you to do that, but I already don't ask people for money. I have no intentions of setting up like an actual operation studio with all of the equipment that comes along with this. This is a very ad hoc save our country kind of effort that we do on a shoestring. And so, you know, if I wanted to go full bore and have someone, and I know there's companies that you can hire that will set up all of this stuff, and you just show up in front of your computer every day, and they do all of the stuff remotely. We're not going to do any of that because I don't want to ask you guys for your money. Everybody's struggling right now. So I want to provide this information to you as free of charge as we can. There are people that donate both on Rumble, and there's been a couple of people that's donated. I guess there's some little envelope at the top of X that have donated money just to offset the purchase of some of these books, because some of these books are crazy expensive. But I appreciate all of that. Oftentimes I forget to even say thank you on Rumble often enough. I should say thank you a lot more. We did decide one way to offset the cost of doing this is to design a few t-shirts and put them out there. And Bridget was kind enough to set up some of the design elements of the ones that are going to be coming out, especially the one that's going to come out next. And so basically we've just been robbing Peter to pay Paul. I don't remember, Bridget, who designed those glasses? Was that somebody after the first couple of Alpha Warrior shows, or did you do that?
That was no. That was the very first set?
Snow.
No.
Okay.
Yep. I'm pretty sure. I'm 98%.
Okay. So we have a big fan that lives abroad. And he did some of the initial stuff. He used to write me songs. He hasn't written me a song in a long time. Funny songs. He did some, he's an IT guy, and he did something of me walking down singing. I gotta go find that song. Oh crap, I forgot all about it. Yeah, I had a rock song that he made for me. So again, this is just all of us. This is people around the world holding hands, learning what our real history is so that we can take our countries back. SR71, what you got?
Thank you, Colonel, and we appreciate everybody attending, even though we do have issues every time we start this stuff up. You people hang in there with us, and we love it. But Anyway, I did Earthquake Magoo, James Bernard McGovern Jr. I'm wondering if he was related to McGovern, the senator, but I didn't get that far with it. What I did find interesting about this guy is after the war, he joined Chap, the Civil Air Transport.
Yeah.
and continued with all of this stuff that was going on. Now, of course, he was shot down, and him and his co-pilot and two of the French crewmen were killed. But to me, it's obvious he knew exactly what was going on. He was getting something out of it.
Well, if you go back and you talk to some of those people, like the Ravens, if they had basically separate, now some of them, there's a mixed bag here. Some of them actually were still in the military. They took them out of the flying units in Thailand, and took them up to Laos and some of the other remote sites to fly missions, both combat missions and airlift missions for drugs. And I've actually talked to some of those pilots. So you have those people that were still in the military, and they were told to leave their uniforms in Thailand. They went up there in civilian clothes, pretended to be CIA while they were still on active duty. And then you have some that were on active duty during World War II, got off active duty, and basically became contractors for the CIA flying civil air transport. And that's basically the Flying Tigers and Claire Chennault and all of those, William Polly, all of those people that basically had, like, General Chennault had actually been on active duty during World War II, but basically were set up in front companies. And just like the guys we read about that went down and was employed in that front company in Miami, remember the Alabama National Guard pilots that went down to Guatemala and was flying the Bay of Pigs bombing missions. So they were not on active duty. They were not participating as National Guard members, but they were members of a Guard unit that had been contracted through a front company in Miami to go down and fly for the CIA all of the bombing missions associated with the Bay of Pigs. So that is a very common practice with the CIA, because as Warhamster said, they have no rules. All along?
Hi, Colonel. I missed the early part where Warhamster was speaking about something. You could just mention what the topic was, but I also, in a second, I also wanted to comment on your point about why things like Operation Gladio are not more widely known. And I think maybe I have a useful perspective on this on account of a high school teacher. I taught for, as I mentioned, like 29 years in New York City public schools. And so why does that matter? Most everybody has a kind of disdainful attitude, as in, oh, that's like high school. And it's kind of interesting to think about where that somewhat disdainful attitude comes from and why it really matters. And I think a lot of, if we think about, for example, the history that we now know, thanks to the amazing work of Jim DiEugenio over at kennedysandking.com, he's written several articles on the John J. McCloy's, placing his daughter in CBS News to literally rewrite the primetime CBS News special on the Warren Report that aired in 1967 on 4 consecutive nights in prime time. And let's bear in mind, this is a time when, primetime television could get 30 million, 40 million viewers. It was before internet. It was before the media scrambling that our blessed internet and the CIA have given us since that time. So for example, when high school students don't get any time to learn about the deep media of the participation of the legacy media in the cover-up of the CIA coup d'etat of late 1963, what it means is that they're going to get a political education continuing that's very, very literal, all dashboard and no engine, right? Because CBS and New York Times and legacy media is still allowed to devour every single classroom in the United States on public dimes. And so what's the effect? The effect is that the amount of time to cover the actual engine of power, the national security state, and in my view, and maybe I'm wrong here, but the coup of 1963 is a key moment when the national security state overtook the three branches. It's, if you will, the overtake lane. If you miss that, you surrender all education to kids learning dashboard that is increasingly disconnected from the actual engine of power, because teachers just do not have time to teach CIA history. It in effect gets crowded out. Hence, I think the reason that CIA coup of late 63 is so important is because it really impacts all epistemology. In other words, the division between knowledge that every kid gets in high school, which is versus further, college history majors and whatnot, and explains why many of us, like myself included, are learning this stuff way, way, way too late. That really matters in terms of the number of people with access to this extremely important information you're making available here about Operation Gladio.
Yeah, so you're correct about the general public. I'm not even talking about the general public per se, but you're absolutely right. The capture of the classroom, the what gets printed, what gets bought for classroom material, all of that stuff, all of it's captured. It's not going to come out that way, but I'm more dumbfounded at my own story / ignorance when it came to things like this. Again, I think I'm fairly typical of most military officers. We don't do what we do uneducated. All of them are very highly educated. All of them are encouraged along, especially those of us who spent, the third 30 years in, encouraged to read outside of what it is that your job is. And so very well read, well educated, they've lived all over the world. The thing that strikes me the most is this is not even just it doesn't get reported or it doesn't get talked about. There has been a purposeful blackout. And that's not to say that the information, as Warhamster pointed out correctly, it is available. But let me tell you, for those of you who are not researchers, I can, and I need to do a video of this. I can put in, talking about Gladio specifically, I can put in some key terms like stay behind unit, British, whatever, in a time frame. And I can do that on Brave. I can do that on DuckDuckGo. I can do that on Safari, whatever the default is for Safari. And I will find nothing. If I do that on the search engine Yandex, I'll have 20 pages. And there is a again, it is just so blatantly obvious that there is, I'll just give you an example since we're talking about it. So I have a search in, let's see, where did I do with that? Where did it go? Brave. Oh, never mind. I don't have it up. I had done a search on, where did it go? Covert, the word covert, gladio, and paramilitary. And on the search on Yandex, I got, let's see, I got Covert Action in the Cold War, which is a book that was actually printed in a British print that didn't show up on doing it on Brave. I also got a Veterans Today article on the whole, topic, several actually. And then the one that I think is the funniest is this group called ISGP, which you can't, they're full of crap. They did good stuff. I mean, Le Circle, they've got the World Anti-Communist League, they have all the Trilateral Commission, all that stuff. You will not find them on a search on anybody else except for Yandex. Yandex is the only one that brings their articles up, and this guy has accumulated a crap ton of stuff that tells you who all the people are. And then again, like right here where it starts talking about Henry Kissinger on their website, this ISGP website. And this is under the article Le Circle's membership, of which Henry Kissinger was a member. And so it gives you all of the sources, a bunch of quotes, then it tells you where he was born, what he did in his early life, and not a wiki version of it. I mean, this is like, and it's all footnoted. And it talks about his affiliation with Nazi partisans, his involvement in CIA clandestine. He became the consultant to the director of the Psychological Strategy Board in 1952, the one we were just talking about. So when I find these books, like the one that I'm reading from, The President's Secret Wars, I go to this site, and some of these, like the Psychological Board and some of the others, all I do is put that in the search engine on this website, this ISGP website, and it will tell me everybody who had anything to do with that Psychological Board, like Henry Kissinger. And that's the reason why I have this particular one open right now, because that's exactly what I did. So it also goes on to say he was involved in covert arms as part of the National Security Council. He was the director and primary founder of this other entity. It talks about Gordon Gray, who we just talked about in this book. So they're confirming all of the information that's in this book. And that's kind of how I like to try to triangulate the information. Down here, that other book that I'm reading about Nelson Rockefeller, Thy Will Be Done. It says under Kissinger became known as the most trusted aide to Nelson Rockefeller in the 50s. And that's when he's down in Latin America planning the takeover and the murder of all of those indigenous Indians down there, and working out of this, government office, supposedly helping Latin America when he was actually capturing Latin America for the Rockefeller business side of things.
Sorry, Colonel, mind if I apologize for interrupting, but who did you say became Nelson Rockefeller's most trusted aide in South America?
Nelson Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Yeah. So it also talks about him while he was at Harvard, talking about there was a study done about nuclear weapons and foreign policy for the CFR that he was involved in. He was a director, special project manager for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which is kind of like their nonprofit, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just stuff after stuff after stuff, that Henry Kissinger did, and all of his deep state ties. And so oftentimes I will use that site to kind of validate, and do searches by words, to come up with the verification as I'm vetting books to use on the show. And so that to me is kind of a combination. If you've got to dig that hard to find stories about Operation Gladio on the internet, they are basically hiding the information while at the same time not hiding it. So they will tell you, oh, it's right out there on the internet. Yeah, but it's not going to come up in any normal search on the internet, which again is why I ended up, starting the book collection, because after what they did for archive.org in the middle of our research, when they took it down, and I lost all of my saved books, I had folders set up. I'm glad early on that we decided to do the hard copy book for everything that we could, because I didn't lose any of that all along.
Yeah, Colonel, I just wanted to bring up a point, since you mentioned the relationship with between Nelson Rockefeller and Kissinger in the 50s. It's one of the things that is kind of, in my mind, perhaps deliberately obfuscated in most mentions of Nelson Rockefeller in today's day and age, which, by the way, I might add, are increasingly infrequent given his monumental impact on 20th century and hence our current moment. I mean, it's almost bizarre how infrequent we get references to Nelson Rockefeller, given his almost 3 different Nelson Rockefellers, in the sense of, governor of New York, running huge aspects of CIA, and also, running the Rockefeller foundations and the foundational aspect of the Rockefellers. But a lot of times you'll see the media, especially, the quote unquote, well, it's really what I would today call right-wing Democrat media, refer to Nelson Rockefeller as a quote liberal Republican, and that can be very, very, very deceptive in my opinion. Why? Because there's many reasons, but especially as it relates to Mr. Henry Kissinger's little nuclear book published in somewhere between 55 and 58, and Nelson Rockefeller's support for that policy. I mean, if you look at that book, that is not a whole heck of a lot far from a Dr. Strangelove or some really dynamic boys over in Omaha at Strategic Air Command, or Strategic, the First Strike Boys over in Omaha, that were alluded to in 2 movies that emerged in 1964. Of course, Dr. Strangelove, and the other in Failsafe, which is a real interesting movie. And they had their finger on the pulse of Omaha, let me put it like that. So Rockefeller is like, if you look at his nuclear policy in Kissinger's, if that's a liberal, ...
Yeah. All right. Anybody else got anything? Nope. All right. I have a change of schedules. So tomorrow, I am going to be on at noon, not with War Hamster, but a new podcast that we've not been on before, called Grace Asagra, Asagra, at noon. I will send you guys a link to that. Then War Hamster and I will continue our secret societies on Friday at noon. We have the famous Paul Williams tomorrow at 4 during this, and it will be on Rumble exclusively. I won't be talking on Spaces at all. It's just going to be piped over to the Spaces platform. So it'll show up like that red space as opposed to the purple one you can interact with. So if you're not on Rumble in the chat, I will not see your comments. So if you want to interact with us, please log on to that show on the Rumble platform. And we will, like I said, pipe it over to Spaces, that if you can't get into Rumble, you can view it on Spaces. It's just not going to be a live forum like we normally have. And then tonight at 9:30, I will be on the Alpha Warrior program, and we're going to talk about gladiogeography. I do think that right now is the perfect opportunity to do kind of a summary of where we're at and what the importance of it is, especially given we're kind of just going to do the first half of the show on the basic geography of how Operation Gladio unfolded. And then we're going to do the second part of the show on some of the current stuff that's being talked about and what that possibly could mean. So it's going to be a different than our normal Operation Gladio shows, but very interesting nonetheless. And then next week, we're going to start a new area. Like I did the deep dive on the World Anti-Communist League with Alpha. We're going to start a new one called the Institute for Policy Studies. Now, I didn't realize how important that particular entity was, but for those of you who followed through most of our journey here, you guys know who Ambassador Latier is, and the fact that he was bombed and assassinated via a car bomb in downtown Washington, D.C. I did not know until very recently that Ambassador Latier actually worked at the Institute for Policy Studies, which is a nonprofit basically paid for by the CIA. And I found that very interesting. Apparently, the Institute for Policy Studies hired people of all genres to appear to be a neutral think tank, while at the same time really pursuing a very fascist agenda and using the people that represented other facets of the philosophical spectrum as cover. And it's quite shocking, some of the stuff that they were up to. But anyway, Bridget, go ahead.
I will try tomorrow if there's people that can't get over to Rumble or for whatever reason. I will try and be in the chat on X and over in Rumble so that I can field a couple of the questions if you guys do have questions.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna try.
Okay.
Assuming that.
Yeah, Bridget can multitask when it comes to electronics. I don't even try. Yeah, I don't even try. So anyway, all right. That's all I got. I'm glad we're ending a little early today. I've got dinner with my family and the Cates brothers, which is always very interesting on Wednesday. Lots of lively conversations over the dinner table. So I will, like I said, be with you guys tonight on Alpha Show 9:30, tomorrow at noon. And I will send that link out tomorrow as soon as I get it. I've not been on her show, so I don't know how she links that. But as soon as I get that information, I'll send it to you guys at noon. And then 4 o'clock, Paul Williams, the biggest show we've ever done. And I am over the moon. So somebody asked me yesterday, I was talking to them on the phone, and they're like, oh my God, you turned into a fangirl in like 30 seconds. And I said, I am going to so fangirl over Paul Williams the entire show. So, yeah, I'm just, I still can't believe we're going to actually do it. But anyway, all along, did you have something?
Yeah, sorry, Colonel. You may have mentioned this already, but I've really been finding your show with Warhamster on the Secret Societies like really incredible, and I think that it needs to be spread everywhere. And I normally you do that on Thursdays. Are you still planning on doing that tomorrow?
Friday at noon. Friday at noon.
Friday at noon.
We just moved it to Friday. Yeah.
I really urge everyone to hear this. And also spread the older episodes. You're going to get a lot of traction if you share that with other people, because people want to hear this stuff, and it's truly amazing.
It is. Warhamster is one of the smartest people I know. We have, and what's really interesting about him and I's relationship, because obviously I know stuff, and he's a reformed, as he calls it, Wall Street banker. He knows a lot of stuff in his lane, and I know a lot of stuff in my lane. And because of our backgrounds, we have very different philosophical outlooks on many different topics. Because of our mutual respect for each other's knowledge in our respective field, we can agree to disagree on many different areas. He always tells me his opinion. I always tell him my opinion, and we always end up smarter as a result of that. And so I value his intellect, his friendship. And because we have such unique backgrounds, I do think that presenting the information from those different perspectives brings it to people in real world. Some people, you come across and they can talk above most people. And I'm not saying most people are stupid, but because I certainly fall in this category. There are people who can speak in a way, because they've never been a teacher. They speak in a way that doesn't translate to the way normal people talk. And I do think that that is one of the things that I pride myself on, having been through the rigors of being a tech school instructor and having people in front of you that your job is to impart a fundamental standing, especially of something very practical that's going to be their actual job, as opposed to just kind of information in general that you hope sometime in their life they're actually going to use. You having to translate principles of electricity and hydraulic fluid and that type of thing into normal language that people can understand it and make it make sense to them, gave me a great foundation to do what I'm doing today. Again, I do believe in God. I believe that all of our path is something that you go through in order to prepare you for whatever his next mission is. And I believe everything that I had put in front of me during my lifetime has prepared me to be right here, right now, which is why X's stupid technical bullshit isn't going to dissuade me from doing what I'm doing. Go ahead, Trump Frog.
Hey, what's up, Colonel? What's up, Bridget? What's up, SR? And I see Cousin It in the building. What's up, friend? It's been a long time. Sister from another mister. I just want to say, I really like what you said about that. I think whatever we go through is God's plan. It's our path. All this is meant to grow us. Whatever challenges we have, it's not how, it's all in how you respond, right? Can you see it as an obstacle or an opportunity? And life's not always easy, so it's not a pep talk, but I love that you said that. I was having that conversation last night, specifically about everything that's going on, and people are so black-pilled, so freaked out. And I'm like, well, you're only as good as the source of information that you get. And to me personally, I feel like what we're going through right now, that we went through the last 4 years, is going to prepare us for some of the craziness we'll have in the next 4 weeks. But there's always beauty on the other side of everything. After the darkest night is the brightest day. So
Yeah.
I know the last thing I'll say is I know that, some of the challenges I've gone through in my life have taught me how to deal with the opportunity that came in front of me. Let's leave it at that. God bless you all.
Amen. So do you have anything coming up that you have scheduled, Trump Frog?
Well, you know what? I might actually do a space because there's so much just black pill drama. Trump is the Antichrist, and he's the New World Order guy. Just all of this stuff. I think people need a little perspective. So I'm just going to get my own. People can think the way they want, but, So I think I might do one tonight. If not, I'm definitely going to do one tomorrow.
Tomorrow night tomorrow, my personal opinion, tomorrow night would be better because I'm going to be on Alpha's show tonight. And I think some of the information I'm going to provide will give you a big springboard to do it tomorrow if you want to hold off.
Works for me. I try to avoid spaces. Just I love talking to people like in here, and just people are just so worn out and just so unhappy. I don't get it. I think we're going through the greatest time to be alive, even though it seems like it's off. I think there's blessings on the other side of what we're dealing with. That's just me.
I agree. Absolutely.
I'm not being a opium dealer.
Better than being an opium dealer.
And they make money, though. That's the only problem. I have to figure out how I can sell opium to people.
Yeah, but you're going to have crowns in heaven. They're going to be in hell.
Amen. Amen. Really does.
All right.
Amen.
All right, guys. I will see you tonight, 9:30, or tomorrow at noon. Take care.
God bless you.
God bless. All right, guys. I am going to jump off of here. Thank you. Sorry again for having to be over here. I wish we could. I mean, I'm glad we have it over here as well, but I wish we could do it and it wouldn't be a problem over there. We doing a principle for the electricity episodes. Actually, I'm actually trying to convince my dear husband to do a podcast with me. My husband is an electrical contractor, and he told me that I was the first woman that he could ever actually talk about electrical principles with, because I know all that some stuff too. And he's also a licensed building contractor. And so I do think we went through some crazy initial times, and I do think it would be a very interesting show. So thank you for saying that. I do think it would be beneficial to everybody. My husband is an amazing man. He is an amazingly smart, practical guy, both from him working on his car. He just changed our, we have well water. He just changed our pump. And I'm like, just pay somebody to do that. He's like, I'm not paying somebody to do that. He just went out there, set the one aside, put the new one in, did all the plumbing. Just totally amazing. And I think it would be a very interesting show to interview him with some of the jobs that he's done. He did baggage conveyor all over the world in international airports. Did Panera bakeries. I didn't even know they had like dough manufacturing places that were separate from their stores. They do. He knows where they're all at. He's been there. So anyway, I'm still convincing him that he needs to do that with me. So I'm going to tell him, oh, you guys think that would be an awesome idea. Maybe that'll help. I took a military course on the principles of electricity. Yeah, I taught it SR 71. Yeah. And again, that's the reason why I think our military and people being in the military that are mechanically inclined or cyber inclined or whatever, it's a great place for people who don't have any money to go learn a trade. I didn't necessarily go to learn a trade. I went because of a dare from my dad, but I did learn a trade, and it changed my life, obviously. So anyway, okay. Keesler spent 8 months at Keesler learning aircraft navigational systems. Oh, cool for you, Beeman. So you know that I go to Keesler every year at Cruising the Coast. I too went to Keesler, but I went there for the officer personnel school. Love Keesler. Love the Hurricane Hunter mission. Talked to those guys quite a bit about some crazy stuff. But yeah, I love Keesler. I love Southern Mississippi. My favorite is Ocean Springs. Love the ladies at the Pink Rooster. They're an amazing group of women vendors selling all kinds of beautiful art and jewelry and stuff like that. So awesome. All right, guys, I got to go. Got to get ready for dinner. Thanks for being here. You guys take care. See you tonight at 9:30 on the Alpha Warrior Show.